Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm so grateful and so eager to have Tim Creasey with us today, a very special guest because Tim is an author, researcher, and change expert. His work forms the foundation of the largest body of knowledge on change management. His role as Chief Innovation Officer at Prosci, and for those of you who are not yet familiar with Prosci, that is the world's most widely adopted individual change management framework. And his role there gives him unparalleled insight into change management challenges, trends, and futures. And Tim has spoken to literally hundreds of thousands of people around the globe. We're so grateful and excited, Tim, to have you here because from everything that I've seen and read, I know that you deeply care about empowering individuals to have the right data and the right actionable information to get even better results. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. It's such an honor, and I love this. The intersection of organizational outcomes with helping human beings excel at what it is they're trying to do. So, an honor to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, would you be willing to share? We always like to kind of start this podcast with how in the world did you get into this line of work? Would you be willing to share your story a little bit with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And because change management, it's an interesting discipline because very few people start there. A lot of people find their way there, whether it's from project management or process excellence or training or communication. I've actually been at ProSci for 20 years now, and I kind of stumbled into the position. My background is in economics and political science. I was all geared up to go do a PhD in comparative economics once I got out of undergrad. But my partner at the time, wife and mother of my children now, had an extra year so that she could get her teacher license. And I actually landed a 3-month gig with ProSci, only a 3-month gig, to really support one of the clients that we were interacting with back then. What I found was, if macroeconomics is how the whole economy works and microeconomics is how an individual firm makes decisions, what has always intrigued me is what makes a person decide what it is they do. And change management as a discipline, I've started describing it as microeconomics because it really helps us understand what makes a human being tick. And if they are in a change situation at work, what can we do to help them be most successful in the change that we're asking them to take on, whether it's some goofy new technology, adhering to a new process, or stepping into a whole new mindset in the organization. What is it that we can do to set that person up to succeed? So that's microeconomics, and I just kind of fell in love with it. And over the last 20 years, I think ProSci has both caught the wave and helped fan the wave. That in the end, organizational outcomes are dependent on how well we help our people through change, and that successful change is modelable and repeatable. And so what can we do to equip organizations and change practitioners around the world to more successfully help the people they are trying to help succeed in times of change? So it's been a wonderful and rewarding career, and we do meaningful work, which I think is kind of the most important piece of the puzzle. So.
Well, I think what's really exciting here as we step into this conversation about change management is that whether somebody is a leader in an organization, a leader in their home, a parent, a teacher, the practices are really about how to help people adapt to change, and they are transferable. So whoever is listening today, I know without a doubt will get some value to help them feel better during change themselves and help others to adapt with more ease to change. So how about we start with, and I know you've kind of already touched on it, but what exactly is change management?
Yeah, great question, because the term has been used many different ways with many different meanings. When we describe change management, we really define it as how will you prepare, equip, and support your people through the change journeys they're going to be taking as a result of the projects and initiatives in your organization. And so Calvin Coolidge, the 30th president of the United States, once said, "Those who trust the chance must abide by the results of chance." which is the reality in organizational change. If we are going to put in a new collaboration platform, send out an email to everybody on Monday that they have training on Tuesday, that the new system goes live on Wednesday, that's leaving outcomes up to chance. And it's leaving that people-dependent portion of the project outcomes up to chance. And we know that we just don't have the luxury of abiding by the result of chance these days. So change management then is this discipline that says when we implement an organizational change, there is a technical side of that change where we design, develop, and deliver a technical solution that meets the needs or helps us seize the opportunity. But every successful change has the other side as well, the people side of change, that change is engaged with and adopted and used by our people. And it's only when the two come together that we get successful results and outcomes. And the change landscape is littered by beautiful solutions designed, developed, and delivered perfectly that nobody embraced, adopted, and used. And that doesn't create value for the organization, and it creates consternation and frustration for the people in our organization. So we kind of took a step back over the discipline for the last 40 years, Prosci for the last 20, to say, what are the things we can do to better introduce a change, to better prepare our people, to better equip our people for the changes we're asking them to take on so that we and they are more successful. And I think that's the really neat thing, is that in the end, when we pay attention to helping our people through change, the data is abundantly clear that the organization is better off. As organizations grow change capability, the overall portfolio success rate for that organization goes up. We know projects and initiatives are better off. That, based on the data, we get a 6-fold increase in likelihood of meeting objectives when we go from poor change management to excellent change management. We get a 3-fold bump when we go from poor to fair, because there's so much poorly managed change going on right now. So the organization's better off, projects and initiatives succeed, but I think in the end, our people are better off. It is the right way to treat our people when we ask them to take on a change, to position them to succeed, to set them up to be successful. And so that's, to me, the intentionality of change management is it's really around bringing empathy to the change equation. It's really around putting a human face to the types of organizational change we're trying to bring forward. And the better we can help our people, the more successful those organizational efforts will be. And so that's how we define change management. It's preparing, equipping, and supporting our people through the change journeys we're asking them to take as part of our projects and initiatives. And then, of course, there's a couple of decades of research and sophisticated processes and tools that help us do it well. But in the end, that's what it's all about, tending to the people side of our organizational changes.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that so clearly. And at the end of the day, it's about people, and it's about treating people the right way. And as a result, everything else kind of tends to work out in terms of business measures and so on. And I'm curious to know, what is that percentage or average percentage of change programs that actually fail when we don't do these change management practices, when we don't utilize that?
Yeah, we see again in our data, there is that kind of urban legend 70% failure rate. I usually stop reading or turn off a podcast as soon as I hear the 70%, so I'm not going to invoke it. Based on our latest round of research, those projects with poor change management met and exceeded objectives about 15% of the time. Those with excellent change management met or exceeded objectives 90% of the time. So that's where you're getting that sort of 6-fold bump in terms of meeting objectives. The interesting thing about the people side of change is it's always going to be there, whether you pay attention to it or not. There is always a people side of change. Now, you can ignore it and leave it up to hope or leave it up to chance, like Calvin Coolidge told us, or you can be thoughtful and intentional about it. And that's where we start to really kind of close that gap around success rates, is when we realize that we will pay for the people side of change one way or the other. We'll either pay for it up front and be thoughtful and intentional and provide people the information they need when they need it, or we're going to pay for it at the back end when we flip that switch to go live and no one in the organization is ready or engaged or able to bring to life the change that we've been envisioning. So it matters, and it matters at the bottom line too. We also see a direct correlation between how well we pay attention to the people side of change and whether or not we finish on time and on budget. which is a little bit paradoxical, right? Because I have spoken to a project manager before who says, Tim, all this change management stuff makes sense and sounds good. However, I've got a timeline and a budget that I got to stick to. And if I pay attention to the people, it's going to slow me down or cost too much. But what we find in about 4,000 data points over the last 12 years is that there is a direct correlation between how well we tend to our people and whether or not we even finish on time or on budget. And a lot of that, I think, comes from two of the most costly letters in organizational change, the letter R and the letter E. What I mean by those costs, right? We've seen these: retrain, rescope, redesign, redo, retreat, right? Where we have to just full on back off of the change. Those costs happen when we bring the people side of change to the equation too late in the ballgame. And so to me, that's one of these big mindset shifts that we need leaders and organizations to continue to embrace. And I think there's been some movement here. But when we start to realize that the people side of our change is the change, the technological solution is an enabler of the change. The human side of change is really where organizational change happens. And that's where change management gives us all kinds of insights and better understanding about how to help people navigate those challenges of change.
And this is so real. And I imagine that any leader in an organization has experienced some version of resistance to change from his or her team, whether it's active resistance or more passive, that then, is just as painful, if not more, later on, as you're saying. In fact, just this morning, I had a conversation with a newer client, and there's some disharmony happening in the team, and, someone in the organization that may leave as a result of that. And sometimes it takes that kind of level of, of alarm, if you will, to wake up and realize that, we must pay more attention to human thoughts, to human emotions, how people are feeling as they're going through a change, and how important it is to do it as early as possible, to, anticipate, to prevent, right, as much as possible.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, because resistance isn't free. It's not like we just shoulder it and kind of continue to trudge forward. Oh, that made it harder, but we're still going to get it done. You've identified some of those real tangible costs and consequences of resistance. Loss of valued employees is one of those real tangible costs when we fail to support our people in times of change. I used to ask this question, and I used to teach a one-day program around how to build organizational muscle, real organizational capability, embedding change management as a core competency above and beyond what we do on an initiative, but where the organization really grows change muscle. Because we all know, and especially in the last 15 months, organizational agility is a strategic imperative. It's what's going to differentiate the winners from the losers, is whether or not we can outchange the conditions, the competitors, and what's going on around us. So I teach this class all around the world, and I used to ask the question: raise your hand if you've left an organization because of how poorly a change got managed. I've never taught a class where a hand didn't go up. And usually it's a third, a half, 70% of the class that says, I left an organization because of how poorly change was implemented, that I wasn't feeling equipped. I wasn't feeling prepared. I wasn't feeling engaged in that change journey. And I walked out the door. And the thing is, it's not the people we don't mind if they leave. It's the people we can't afford to have walk out the door. And so, attrition is just one of those costs and consequences of resistance when we allow it to manifest and fester, and we're not being thoughtful about how we might address it up front. So.
Yeah. And, in this case, as I imagine many cases, the leaders deeply care. They want to do the right thing. They deeply, deeply care about helping people feel good about the change, and they just don't know how. And so let's get into the how, if that's okay with you. So let's say somebody's experiencing, noticing, or wanting to avoid, prevent as much as possible resistance as a change is coming up. What can they do?
In our methodology, we teach kind of two avenues: resistance prevention and resistance response. So resistance prevention is all the work that an initiative project leaders can do up front to identify, anticipate, prevent, address the objections they know that are going to be there. If we have options A and B that we're trying to choose between and we ended up picking option A, everybody in option B camp, we should anticipate some resistance, right? And so it's about being thoughtful. Hindsight's 2020, but foresight often is pretty close if we are being intentional about looking where we're going to see some of that resistance. Resistance response then is really around understanding the root cause and helping somebody step forward through that resistance. And there I'm going to introduce, the Prosci ADKAR model as a way to understand where the resistance is coming from. ADKAR is Prosci's individual model. It describes the 5 building blocks of successful individual change. Whether I'm trying to help a child pick up their room, I'm trying to eat more healthily at home, or I'm trying to get my team to start using that new collaborative feature in Teams. ADKAR describes those 5 building blocks of an individual change. It begins with A, awareness of the need for change. The very first building block is that I've internalized why this change is needed. Not just that you told me it's happening, but I've actually internalized why now, what if we don't? I've gotten to the point where I, as an individual, would say, I understand why. After awareness comes desire to participate and support the change. That's where I've taken the personal decision to really step out of the current state and step into a transition. I need to understand what's in it for me, and it needs to align with my motivators and the organizational motivators. But the second building block of successful change is when I would say, I've decided to. After A and D comes the K in ADKAR. That's the knowledge to change. And that's really where we jump to usually in times of change. We just train people with the knowledge, but knowledge without awareness and desire falls on deaf ears. So knowledge is needing, what do I need to know during and after the change to be successful and in context of awareness and desire? After that is ability to implement those skills and behaviors. It's where I've demonstrated the capability that I can show up the new way that I need to for this change. And I might need practice and coaching, and there might be barriers that I have to figure out how to overcome. But ability is where I can demonstrate that the change is happening. And then the final piece of ADKAR, the R, is reinforcement to sustain the change. And I jokingly say that Prosci would be nowhere if Jeff Hyatt had invented the ADKA model without the R at the end. Because it is our natural, physiological, psychological tendency to go back to what we've used to do, right? I've seen this show up in many of your podcasts about how hard it is to stay in that new way and how much we get drawn back to what things used to be. So reinforcement is those mechanisms, the rewards, the measurements. It's what we do to sustain and make sure the change sticks. So successful change happens when a person can say, I understand why, I've decided to, I know how to, I'm able to, and I'll continue to. Resistance creeps up when one of those 5 blocks is not in place. And so it's always fascinating, right? If an employee walks into your office and says, here we go, this is the stupidest thing we've ever done. I can't discern what it is that's causing this person to have a problem with this change. So I can say, oh, do you understand why it's happening? Yes, I absolutely understand why. I've been having to deal with the old broken system for years. So they have awareness. That's not it. Well, have you decided to participate? Yeah, I came to the focus groups. I really engaged in some of the early training. So desire's there. Do you have the knowledge on what you need? No, this new system isn't letting me do the one thing that I need to do. So now it's a fear of knowledge. And a fear of the ability that is preventing this person from kind of stepping forward through that change journey. So it's hard to make sense of why someone's resisting change until we understand where in their journey they're really struggling to step forward. And so we use ADKAR as that measuring stick to help people unlock the challenges of change by understanding the building blocks of successful change.
And it's such a helpful, simple model. I have clients that use it, and it just, because it is so simple to assess and really identify where are kind of the gaps, what are the pockets of resistance, as you said, then we're more empowered to focus on the areas that are going to be creating the most change for the individual. Nice. And I imagine that it varies from individual to individual within the team. Yes?
Oh, most certainly. Yeah, ADKAR is it's an individual model that we can use at scale to support organizational change, but it is individual in nature. So I might be stuck at awareness while you already flew through awareness, desire, and knowledge, but you're now struggling with ability and really refining those capabilities. And so our resistance may look the same, but the root cause is very different. And so, yeah, discerning where that root cause of resistance comes from is going to be critical. It also helps us identify some blind spots that we often fall into when we think about resistance. I've done this, I use an interactive polling software when I do presentations up on stage. And so I've asked thousands of people this question from stage with a multiple choice poll behind me. And I step forward and cover my eyes. But the question is this: which of the 5 ADKAR blocks creates the most resistance to change when it's in your organization? Which one is the hardest for us to bring forward? And I step forward and close my eyes, and all the numbers start going up on the choice poll behind me. 65 to 70% always pick desire, because it's that personal decision to get on board. And so they say desire is going to be the biggest challenge. About 10% say reinforcement, about 10% more say awareness, 5% say knowledge, and a couple percent say ability. So desire is the one we go to because it's a personal decision, and we can't make people have desire, but we can influence and nudge it. If I look deeper into the research, though, and I ask what is the greatest source of resistance to change from employees in an organization, it's that nobody made a compelling case for why we need to take on this change in the first place. It's awareness of the need for change. And I think this has really emerged as organizations have embraced values around empowerment and accountability and ownership. Because in the old days, I always talk about my grandfather's GE, right? When my grandfather, he started his career there, he ended his career there. When he was told to jump, his answer was how high? Because that was the value system that was rewarded, was consistency and control and predictability. In an organization that's embraced new values around ownership and accountability, when we ask somebody to jump, we should expect them to say why. That's the response we should expect back. I don't want to hear how high. That means you haven't really leaned into owning your work, owning the process, owning the output. And so this emphasis on awareness of the need for change and it being the root cause of resistance is really tied in to some exciting developments that are happening culturally within the values of organizations. And so awareness of the need for change, desire to participate and support the change tend to be those ADKAR blocks where we see a lot of a resistance manifesting itself.
Thank you for sharing that. And it makes sense in terms of when we think about the fact that our values dictate our behavior. And when we believe that a change is beneficial for us, meaning it's in alignment with our values, we tend to feel safer to walk towards the change, even when it's complex or we don't have yet the knowledge or ability in those things, but we're willing to kind of step forward and learn and find a way to make it work for us. So what advice do you have then for people who want to say, okay, how can I communicate a change in the most compelling, meaningful way to get the best results?
Yeah, great question around communicating the change. Well, I think what we want to do. So I wrote an article. Actually, it was about 14 years ago, and we just pulled it forward and kind of redid it and kind of cleaned it up. But the article is about the difference between a telling plan and a communication plan. Because I see a lot of projects and leaders build telling plans. And a telling plan simply informs employees what you are thinking about as the project leader or as the project manager or the solution developer. It tells the people what solutions you evaluated, which one you picked. It's all about you. An effective communication plan is founded in the answers employees need to move forward in the journey that they're on. And so one of the biggest disconnects we see is what are the first things we're talking about in an effective communication plan. A telling plan will provide details of the solution. An effective communication plan is founded in the why now, what if we don't? And given the amount of work that's the amount of change happening in organizations today as we process this pandemic response, I've added, why now, what if we don't? And I've also added why this instead of that. Because I think as human beings, we have limited caloric value and limited time to expend on stuff going on around us. And so in addition to, if I really am going to internalize why this change, I need to understand why this one instead of that one. But our tendency of our senior leaders and our solution developers is to really focus on talking about what it is they created rather than going back and grounding in why is it that we need to step out of the current and step into a transition as we try to navigate towards a future state that we're all aspiring to get to. So.
Yeah, and it makes such perfect sense, right? I mean, it's like, think of it, the metaphor of a child and a parent, right? A parent saying, this is what we're doing, and this is when it starts, and right, and it's like, as kids, we don't have necessarily a say or agency or control. As adults, we want that agency. We want to understand why I need to do this, because I have choice. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it also makes sense the other direction too. I talk about time travel a little bit here. If we talk about change in terms of a current transition and a future state, current state is how things are today. Transition is the messy middle when we move, and the future is where we're trying to aspire and get to. And I know that the world is changing so fast that it's rapid and continuous and simultaneous, but it helps us understand a change. Your senior leaders live in the future state. That's where we pay leaders to live, is in the future state. Who are we going to be as an organization in 3 or 5 years? Our project teams and our solution developers, they live in the transition state. That's what we pay them to do, is design and develop the way to navigate the transition state. The rest of the organization is in the current state. And so if there's an announcement for a new change, let's say it's coming out next week, all the senior leaders may have been thinking about it for 2 years. The project team's been working on it for 15 months. The rest of the organization's finding out next week. And so the tendency of our leaders and solution developers is to talk about the current or the transition in the future where they've been living. And so part of our job, if we want to really help people succeed in change, is to play that role of time traveler for our leaders and help pull them back to where people are. Give people the answers that they need to take a step out of where they are today. And so that's one of these roles that change management will often play, is time travel in helping bring our people along on the journey that others in the organization may have already started on.
It's brilliant, and it presupposes that we need to understand, for those individuals that are in the current state, that's all they know. How are they seeing the world, right? What do they see as the gaps, if any, right? Or issues or problems, right? What are they wanting? Because, as you said, many of the senior leaders just are not there. And when we don't know, then we don't know how to best respond, because we don't understand the truth behind the real root cause of the resistance. And it might be masked in some other thing.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that. And what other tips can you give? And I know that there is a whole body of research, and of course, I invite our listeners to check out Prosci and Google how to navigate resistance through Prosci, because it's so simple, yet there's such depth to it in terms of tactics for managing resistance. If you were to kind of choose a couple of those that are absolutely essential for every leader to know and embody, what would those tactics be?
In terms of managing resistance?
Yes.
Yeah, great question. I guess the first is to expect it, not be surprised by it. And I think this one gets interesting, especially if we're fixing something that's really broken, right? Sometimes I think leaders are surprised when there's resistance to something that everybody complains about, right? Because we think that moving out of this broken system that everybody complains about into this new one is going to be wonderful, and everyone's going to jump up and down, hunky-dory, here we go. The reality is, stepping out of a known current state, even if it's one that we're not jazzed about, into an unknown transition, an unknown future, that's scary and challenging for everybody. And so I think that's my first, is make sure that we prepare for and expect rather than be surprised by resistance. Even if we're fixing a problem and we think the new solution is going to be so much better than the world that people know today, because at least it's known and you're asking them to step into an unknown. So I guess that's the first piece. My second is, don't spend all your time focusing on resistance. There's certainly some in the change management discipline that have really built up change management as just a way to minimize resistance and mitigate resistance. Prosci comes at it from a completely different perspective, that change management really is around preparing, equipping, and supporting your people through the changes they're on. And if we don't do a great job at it, there will be resistance. And so we should be ready to address and deal with it. But instead of just focusing on mitigating resistance, let's really focus on engaging and bringing people into that change journey. And I guess my third tip would be to look for that root cause. That even if resistance looks the same, the root cause, the symptom of that resistance, the symptom might be the same, but the root cause might be very different. And so things like ADKAR help us make sure that we can discern and really pull apart what's causing the resistance that we're running into.
If you were to have a leader in front of you now who is saying to you, I get everything you're saying. I totally get it. I believe in it. It makes sense. But, my organization has been through so much change, and I don't think this stuff is even going to work because people are just, frustrated, and, I really don't think they're even going to listen to me. What would you say to somebody who's really at the point of having gone through so many changes and seeing so much resistance at that point that they might not even believe that these best practices will work for their organization?
Yeah, I think organizations can create that kind of organizational memory, right? Kind of the scar tissue left by too many changes, too many poorly managed changes, change where resistance really manifested itself in a significant way. And really, that's one of it's an unfortunate assumption, because if we ignore the people side of change, we actually build an environment where embedded resistance is something we should expect. So continuing to plow forward is not an option. We're going to only create an even more reluctant and resistant environment. What I would tell that senior leader, and I kind of mentioned it earlier in this podcast, is that the people side of change is there no matter what. Whether you are paying attention to it and being thoughtful and activating around how to support people, or merely reacting and responding to the people side of change, it's going to be there. So as a leader, you have the ability to improve and support your people by being more active and visible in your support and engagement, by building and maintaining healthy coalitions of support with other senior leaders, by communicating and really being that face and voice of change. Because the organization will see and interpret what you say and what you don't say, and what you do and what you don't do, in terms of signals as to whether or not this one matters, how important this change is, and should I invest the time and energy in it? And so I think leaders, it's come out of our research, right? 11 benchmarking studies over 22 years. Every single time we asked what the number one contributor to successful change was, it was active and visible participation by our senior leaders. And so I think our leaders need to own a little bit of the consequence and a little bit of the cost that we've had in previous changes, and then commit to a new and better way of achieving what they've already signed up to achieve, which is the return on investment of the project. And it is through their people that they're going to be more effective in realizing that value.
Yeah, thank you. And it all comes back to them as individuals as well, navigating their own, if there is any resistance or doubt or, fear, whatever that might be.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And so as we complete, just one last quick question. For these leaders, what guidance can you share to help them, even just as a first step, navigate their own, not even resistance to change, but just how to kind of get more on board with what they want to do, right? So that they can truly project that, confidence with their teams.
Yeah, I think what we need our senior leaders to do is kind of, and again, we don't need them to do it. We need to help them do it as change practitioners, to appreciate that we often see the project ROI and the people side of change considered as two separate things. But if I were going to draw them as a Venn diagram, they are very overlapped. and that the people side of change is part and parcel to what that executive is or what that leader is already trying to achieve when they invest time and energy into the change efforts that they're trying to bring forward. So we really work to position the idea that we can do change through sheer tenacity is many of our leaders will fall into that trap, but we are left with all the collateral damage that comes in terms of both our people and the organization when we aren't being thoughtful about helping those people move forward. So our CEO, Scott McAllister, uses this analogy that, the project that leader is trying to bring about is like trying to get the Best Actor award. Change management's there to get the Best Supporting Actor award. So leader, you have a change already that you're trying to make happen. That's the actor. Change management here is here to help you achieve what you already want to faster and more completely than you could have. Because in the end, your results are intrinsically and inextricably tied to how well you help your people through their change journey and how well you help them navigate the resistance that's going to naturally manifest whenever we try to change anything.
Thank you, Tim. And how can people listening learn even more about this research, more about Prosci's training programs? I went through the, change practitioner program. It was fantastic. How can people engage with Prosci?
Yeah, thank you. So the name of the company is Prosci, Prosci. You pronounced it perfectly. It gets pronounced Prosci quite a bit, but it's actually a contraction of professional and science. So that's where you get the pro and the sci. Prosci.com is a great place to start. There are loads of free resources there, including thought leadership articles, blogs, tons of webinar replays. And that's also where you can go to learn more about Prosci's solutions that we bring to either individual change practitioners like yourself or to organizations through role-based training and advisory service. In the end, our goal is to really be the go-to partner for change success around the globe. We know that leaders know their businesses. What we know is how human beings navigate the change process. And by bringing those two pieces together, we really think organizations are going to be better off, initiatives are going to be better off, and ultimately our people are going to be treated more effectively. So Prosci.com is a great place to go. Solutions@prosci.com will always get you in the front door. And people can also track me down on social media if they want to find me. LinkedIn is where I spend most of my time on the social side, but that's where you get the bourbon-inspired observations. So sometimes those are a little more fun than the mid-morning ones even.
And you have so many fantastic videos on YouTube. And I also invite people to read your book that you wrote with Jeffrey Hyatt, Change Management, The People Side of Change. It is excellent and touches on a lot of the insights that you've shared with us today. So thank you again, Tim, for your time, for your really practical valuable insights. I imagine you've helped many people, right? Not just leaders, people, anyone in life to adapt better to change and to help others. So I appreciate you being here with us today.
Well, Vera, thank you for having me. It was an honor to be here. And I hope, my goal is really just how do you help people unlock the challenges of change in front of them? Because I think most people have the answers. It's about helping them see the challenge of change as unlockable. And so things like A, D, K, A, and R, it's really around equipping people with the tools of unlocking the challenges of change. And that's what we're here for. So thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with your audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.